This is Ed O'Connor, and I'm Marlena Fiol. We've worn many hats during our lifetime, but the hat that's important tonight is that we are co-authors of the book called, it's the story of John and Clara Schmidt, medical pioneers in Paraguay, South America. So right now, all of you are on mute, but we hope to not have you muted for the entire time. And we're really hoping that you will perhaps want to say a few words. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a hand up raised. And if you click on that, then our moderator will know at the end of, toward the end of this program that you might want to share something or maybe ask some questions. And at the very end of this program, we're going to do a raffle and we're going to give away two bundles of 3 books in each bundle.
And you do have to be present at the end if you'd like to be in the raffle.
It's called bribing people to stay to the end.
Up front.
So yeah, do stay for a chance to win a bundle of 3 books. And these are all books having to do with social entrepreneurship and peacemaking. And one of the 3 books is our book called. So hope you'll stay to the end for that. So before we begin, I would like to introduce 5 very special guests. Some of them may say a few words later in this program, but for now, I simply want to acknowledge them and their many contributions. And I'm going to begin with Anne Graber-Hirschberger, who's the Executive Director of the Mennonite Central Committee USA. This book is a book about MCC, the Mennonite Central Committee, in its early years. And so we are absolutely honored to have you here tonight, Anne. Also want to welcome Edgar Stutz. Now, Edgar has held many positions, numerous positions in the Mennonite Central Committee, and he's also been the chairman of American Leprosy Missions. Edgar is featured in our book. He was in Paraguay during a very challenging time for Dr. John and Clara. And Edgar, I know you will say a few words later in the program, and we are so happy that you are here tonight. Also want to welcome 3 doctors from the leprosy station at kilometer 81 in Paraguay. First, Dr. Franz and his wife Annie Dirksen, Dr. Wesley, my older brother, and his wife Esther Schmidt, and Dr. Carlos and Carla Vins. These have all been medical directors of kilometer 81 after John and Clara left, and Carlos is still currently the medical director at kilometer 81. We are so happy that you are here tonight to help us or to celebrate with us the life and the work of John and Clara Schmidt. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Ed, and he's this kind of the storyteller here tonight, and he's going to give you brief highlights of our book called.
So at various times in human history, most people believed that the earth was flat, that the earth was the center of the universe, that women could not be medical doctors because their brains were too small. And those brains would just explode if they took in that much information.
It's a risk. It's a risk. He thought
That's a risk saying that. The tomatoes were too dangerous to eat. The point is, because most people believe something, it does not make it true. And Dr. John and Clara Schmidt were not put off by what most people believed. They did not bow down to those beliefs. And as a result, they used revolutionary methods that got a heavy pushback often from important places like their financial sponsors, like governments, like their neighbors surrounding them. But because John and Clara did not succumb to this strong opposition, they persevered through it, and they actually allowed people to come to new sets of beliefs. And they left the world a better place for those of us who are still here. As we move forward, for example, with the first slide is a picture of
Where it all started with Ori Miller.
Ori Miller, who was the head of the Mennonite Central Committee. He was a senior person in the Mennonite Central Committee for decades. And he's the one that invited and accompanied Dr. John Schmidt to South America when he first made his trip. And here we're going to have a slide, I'm sure, at any time soon, of Dr. John standing next to his first home in 1941 in the Chaco of Paraguay, sometimes called the Green Hell. And he was there taking care of patients.
This was a region considered uninhabitable
By other than the indigenous people who wandered around. He went there right out of his internship and provided medical treatments that he was not fully trained, but there was nobody else to do it. He was interested in not only those medical treatments, but also in other needs. For example, this is a picture of road building, if you can understand that as road building, in the Chaco of Paraguay. And that over time, he took leadership roles in connecting the Chaco to Asuncion, about 450 miles away, so that the produce produced by the people in the Chaco could get to its markets. After almost 2 years in Paraguay, South America, in the Chaco, Dr. John decided he needed help. And so he went back north. And he'd been corresponding with a certain nurse that his brother said would make a good partner and a good wife.
It took 3 months for a letter to get from the US to Paraguay.
Can you imagine your courtship lasting through letters? It took 3 months to get from one place to another. But they got enough figured out in those letters that he came north to be with her, and her face is circled on the screen. And that is Clara, soon to be Clara Schmidt, Clara Regier Schmidt. So she graduated with a nursing class, as you can see, and shortly thereafter,
A few days
later, they married. This is Dr. John and Clara on their wedding day. And the next day, a slide that is about to come up, they left the train station in Newton, Kansas, to go back to Paraguay, South America, on their honeymoon, so to speak. That is Clara coming in from the right side of your screen, moving forward. It's Dr. John on the left side, figuring things out as he did on a regular basis. And in the middle of the screen, the bewildered looking gentleman is Clara's father. Wondering, what is happening to my daughter? You're supposed to stay and marry and be on a farm, but off she goes. And they did move on to the Chaco of Paraguay, and they accomplished many things together. One, they trained a group of nurses, and you can see Clara in front of the room teaching these nurses. Now, I've got to say something about those nurses, and maybe you want to say it.
Yeah, I was just going to say she had no textbooks. It was in German. Her training had been in English. And so she is simply making these translations in her head and making it up as they went along.
Making it up to this class where the people who were highest trained coming in had a 6th grade education. That nursing school, by the way, is still in existence, and it is highly successful. And they also opened a hospital that had been closed while he was away. So they left significant impact in the medical world in the Chaco of Paraguay. And then they came back north together after 1946, I believe it was. And as they came back north, I'm sure we're going to get another slide. They stayed for approximately 5 or 6 years, and they led this incredibly boring life in North America, normal life, start a medical profession, start a family. And this is the family at this point in time, going back to Paraguay, South America.
In 1951.
And what I'm not supposed to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, is you'll notice there is a young baby on the left knee of her mother on the right side of the screen. That is my favorite co-author, Marlena Fiol, who was very young at this point in time. But the real point is they're taking this family to Paraguay to start a leprosy station. Nobody knew for sure how leprosy spread. Now, the real blessing, and this is the entryway to the early stages of that leprosy station. Marlena knows it well because she grew up there. Fortunately, none of the family caught leprosy, by good fortune. That leprosy station was part of what they accomplished there. The early leprosy patients had to be found out in the bush. This is Dr. John with a horse looking for leprosy patients, drinking, obviously, on his multi-day trip into the bush. Why were they out in the bush? Because they had to hide these leprosy patients out there, or they would be locked up in prisons in Paraguay.
The way that leprosy patients were treated in those days is that they were completely isolated and locked up and treated really like criminals. And so he went out into the bush to find patients who would otherwise not come forward.
And mostly they treated them out in the bush, but only the most seriously ill were brought into the leprosy station where Marlena grew up. This is one of those seriously ill patients, and she suffered from two stigmas. One, she had leprosy, and two, she was a midget, as you can well see.
She was a dwarf.
She was a dwarf, pardon me.
So, and she features prominently in our book. She's a lovely soul, and Amalia is her name, and she has a very special place in our book. And her mother, Josefina, was another patient who stayed at the leprosy station. But mostly, and this is so important to John and Clara's story about leprosy, is they treated patients in their homes, which was unheard of at the time. Like I said, mostly they were locked up in those days. And so for the most part, ambulatory treatment, treating them in their homes was what they were doing, and how they revolutionized the treatment of leprosy.
And Dr. John and Clara were at the leprosy station from 1951. They built it physically till 1971 when they left. We're going to skip forward a couple of decades at this point in time. This is the next adventure. The next adventure was they felt called again to farther east in Paraguay into a town, a community called Tres Palmas. Tres Palmas was suffering. It had no industry. It had no real means of roads to the outside world. It was pretty much cut off from the outside world. Its hospital was about to close. It could not attract a physician. And Dr. John and Clara decided they would go there. He would operate as the physician, and they would bring this town and this hospital back into fruition.
So they said they opened the clinic, they spent their own money and raised a lot of money in the north.
They were really good at raising money throughout decades.
Built a hospital and saved really that community from going under in those years.
Yeah, the hospital's doing quite well at this point in time. Their grandson, Anton, is actually the chief physician at that hospital right now. And the community is thriving relative to any expectation. One of the things that Dr. John and Clara spent significant money on was building a road connecting that community to the outside world so that it could flourish. And so those are some of the pieces of, and it's only some of the pieces of the extraordinary work that they did.
Hopefully a taste that will make you want to read lots more.
And I want to say one more thing. We did not choose to focus on the many barriers they faced. These positive outcomes that they produced for other people came at a high price to themselves. The barriers were immense. And it's a thrilling story. It is one that has often brought me to tears to look at what they pushed through in order to be able to produce those outcomes. Anyway.
Thanks for those highlights.
Yeah.
So now
I did it without crying, and that's unusual for me talking about your parents.
Yeah. So I would love for my big brother, Wes, Dr. Wesley Schmidt, more specifically, to say some things about the legacy that our parents have left in these three areas of Paraguay.
How are those worlds today?
How are those worlds today?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
That's your voice.
Can you hear me? Hello?
yes.
Okay. I'll see if I can get the camera to work. If it doesn't, I'll speak without the camera because it doesn't seem to the video. Yes, it's a tremendous privilege to be here and look at I really enjoyed the pictures. I actually read the book again, or the draft you sent me. I read again. I tried to picture and respond to your question, Marlena. What drew the tears in many of the places, and it's just where you're kind of going along and you go around the corner and something comes up and you said, boy, this isn't a normal family. This isn't but it was so much like the real thing, and it was fun to read it again. And the first experience, which was in the Chaco, of course, I didn't. John and Lisa were born there, and just while I'm thinking about it, you didn't mention that Mom was born on an October 30, 107 years ago. I just wanted to mention that today is her birthday. So
It was intentional that we're doing this program on her birthday.
Okay, so the Chaco obviously was something that they lived through, which I don't remember, but I've probably I'm more in the Chaco than any other place as far as my interest, and also quite a bit of time there. And it's amazing to see the colonies thrive now and think about how primitive it was when they started. That little shack, that I imagine that's right in the middle of Philadelphia, and there's a thriving town. Of course, the shack is gone. The hospital does have a little museum, which is the first hospital building. So they've kept that up. So just to think back, 1941 through 1946, and Mom was pregnant with me when they left the Chaco. So that identifies me as having originated in the Chaco, and I'm very proud of that. And then, of course, Calamity 1, where I live.
Wes, if I could interrupt for a second, you talk about you spend a great deal of time in the Chaco. What the people in the audience might be interested in is that you have given to that part of the world as a physician, and you are a successful cattle rancher in that part of the world, as I understand it.
Well, I don't know how successful I am. Fortunately, I have two boys who are very much involved there, and they've actually they've got university training, or you know, they're actually following their profession there. One is a veterinarian and the other agronomy specialized. And so one son lives right there in the ranch, which is land that Dad purchased way back probably in the 50s. I suppose he spent some of the money that he had from his boring practice in Mountain Lake that was left over to buy land. And we feel very fortunate to be able to participate or to develop this together with my other two brothers. So that's yes, we have been blessed with results of that whole experience. Yes. So then we, of course, we lived at Calamity 1. We, I think, for me, it was a great time. I enjoy the rural area a lot, and later when they left us with an uncle in Kansas, I did, you know, I've always been a rural kid. I kind of feel like I'm a Kansas country boy, farm boy. So I was comfortable at Calamity 1. I have very good memories of our trip from Paraguay to the States, which is described in the book. it wasn't as pleasurable for, well, there you go, my camera. Hey, my son, Jonathan, is here coaching me, and so now I'm on the camera. So yeah, I just really enjoyed reading the history of the things that happened, and it was so well done. And then again, the period in Tres Palmas, which I also lived along with them because I was in Asunción at the time. I must say the research you've done in this is amazing. The dates and the specific things that you've mentioned in the book, which I know are just really true to life, describing the life of two very extraordinary people who I think have left us a path to follow. And I am certainly going to make, I'm going to make sure that every one of my children have this book in their library, because it's where they're following. And I'm sure this book will be very interesting for a lot of people. I'm staying with my host here. It's an MK, Steve Spann. They're out today, but just from what I told him, he's already looking forward to read the book. And I'm sure a lot more people will be very much interested in reading this book, which is, by the way, very well written, very interesting.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wes. You know, as a society, we tend to hold up and we tend to admire the sort of the bullheaded revolutionary change maker, in this case, Dr. John Schmidt, and also in our family. And I don't know if Wes, you would agree with this, but I'll speak for myself. I held my father as this ultimate hero doctor. And I really underestimated the role that Clara played in their many contributions. According to David Bornstein, and by the way, this is one of the books that'll be raffled off tonight. It's How to Change the World. He says that for lasting social change, that dogged, persistent, stubborn pushing through barriers needs to be complemented with the peace building that's required for cooperation, and that both of these are important ingredients for social change. That peacemaker in our story is Clara Schmidt. And as Wesley said, today is her birthday, and she would have been 107 years old. Her granddaughter and my daughter, Shireen, has agreed to share a few thoughts about Clara, the peacemaker.
And we see her name on the screen. And there she is.
Hello.
Hey.
See you. It's great to be here. I have a few words that I wanted to say, and I'm going to start with a quote actually from one of the reviewers of the book, from NetGalley. And the quote that was used says, "The evolution of Clara is so beautiful. At first, this shy, unassuming Mennonite nurse who blossoms into a strong, fierce wife, mother, friend, and community activist." Unquote. And now this is my words. Clara was my Grosma, the mother of my mother. As a young child, she was always special to me. As I got to know her as an adult, she was playful and committed to her family, near and far. Her humor emerged often in some of the most unassuming and unexpected moments. She cared deeply about her enormous extended family with so many grand and great grandchildren I could hardly even begin to count, in the hundreds, multiple generations living all over the world. But she found ways to stay connected and always made time and space for all of them. One characteristic that stands out for me was her steadfastness. Quoting one of my favorite authors, Margaret Wheatley, in her book Perseverance, quote, "Steadfastness is a lovely old-fashioned word that we don't hear much about these days. It describes how warriors stand their ground, how they find their position and stay there, unshaken and immovable. Steadfast people are firm in their resolve. They are not shaken by events or circumstances. They stand clear in their beliefs, grounded in their cause, and faithful to the end," unquote. I believe that despite the many challenges through phases of Clara Grossma's life, my Grossma was a warrior. She stood her ground in compassion for those around her and faith to the work that she pursued. She was loving, strong, and fierce to the very, very end. Love you always, Grossma.
All right, so now my daughter has me in total
I'm
tears.
crying too. Thank
And-
you, Shireen.
Thank you, Shireen. So with tears in my eyes, I will say that, again, drawing from one of the books that we're raffling off tonight, Getting Beyond Better. Social change makers seem to follow a similar pattern, according to these authors. They understand the world as it is and find it unacceptable. And in the case of John and Clara, they found unacceptable the fact that leprosy patients were not treated humanely. These change makers envisioned a new future, in John and Clara's case, a future where those suffering with leprosy would be treated with dignity and respect. And number three, these change makers build a more effective model. And in the case of leprosy patients, it was to treat them in their homes with dignity. And fourth, they scale up their solutions. And in fact, the ambulatory treatment method is currently recognized, well, was recognized in the 1960s by the World Health Organization and is now how leprosy patients are treated. It's tempting to think that these change makers like John and Clara are extraordinary people with brilliant insights and that they're born with this amazing, extraordinary talent that the rest of us don't have. But actually, and we describe this in our book, John and Clara were ordinary people with lots of personal foibles and faults, but they had extraordinary vision of what could be. And as the late civil rights activist John Lewis said, ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America, and I would say the soul of our world, by getting into what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. And we initially began writing this story because my mother gave me boxes and boxes full of diaries and letters and said, please write our story. But the truth is, when Ed and I began to get into the research, we realized that we became really convinced that this is a story that we want to bring to the world. And it's our wish that John and Clara's story might inspire each one of us to get into some good and necessary trouble, because our world needs it today.
So just a little bit about our writing process that the pictures have jumped into, and it's a great place to have them. I'm going to tell you a story. Years ago, a woman was arrested for stealing a can of peaches. And she was brought up in front of a judge, and he was a tough judge. And he said, how many peaches were in that can? And she said, I'm really sorry, Your Honor, there were only 6. And he said, 6. You will spend 1 day in jail for each of those peaches, 6 days in jail. And her husband was in the courtroom, and he said, may I be heard, Your Honor? And judge said, yeah, well, what do you want to say? And he said, she also stole a can of peas. Let that one sink in. They weren't working real well together. Fortunately, Marlena and I have had about 30 years now of working pretty well together in a variety of businesses and now writing this kind of material. And as Marlena just said, her mother gave her boxes and boxes of documents, things they'd written, things written about them, things written to them. But we in no way stopped there. where we see Marlena, I think at this point, and the picture in the screen is in Akron, Pennsylvania, at the Mennonite Central Committee Library. And those people went out of their way. We were there 3 days photographing documents they kept putting in front of us about John and Clara Schmidt. And so we were there. We were in the Goshen Library, Goshen College Archives. There was much material there. Again, photo.
And we were in Fenheim with Gundolf Niebuhr, and I think we're going to hear from him in a few moments, but he was fabulous in opening up the archives in Fenheim Colony in the Chaco of Paraguay.
And so we come back with all of this material and spend years literally reading it, organizing it, and turning it into this book called, that Marlena has mentioned now on a couple of occasions. Writing today is not like writing was at a time in the past. Yes, we've got these extensive documents, and we just about broke our back sometimes with these documents. I think there's a picture of that somewhere, James. That's what that felt like, going through these documents. But really, the story goes well beyond that. We've turned our life into a writing project. On airplanes, what do? We write. It's just part of the game.
But it's also beyond writing.
Yeah.
Being authors in today's world, it shocked us. We've been learning so much over the years, and we won't belabor this, but we just want to mention the work to get on social media, to do podcasts, to do YouTube episodes, and we certainly invite you to join us and view some of the YouTubes or podcasts, and there will be links in the emails that we're sending out. But the world of writing today is
you better be on all of the social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, websites, etc. And I'm going to say one thing: we have a YouTube channel. As Marlena pointed out, we put out a new YouTube episode every Tuesday morning, very early, before you're up. And for example, we put out one last Tuesday on racism. That I checked about an hour ago. That's 4 days ago. We're in our 4th day, and it has so far had 1,800 views. We have some of these that have many thousands of views. This one's approaching 2,000. And so we're trying to provide something of real value to the world. It's part of the writing world to do this. And it's a joy for us, mostly.
And now we're going to shut up, and we're going to hopefully hear from those of you who maybe have raised your hand. And James, this is James Shidley.
This is another part of the writing world, is James Shidley, whom we would be lost without.
Yeah.
I don't even want to start to tell you how many things James Shidley makes possible in our lives.
Oh man, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And it's only possible because you guys make it possible as well. So, thanks to you guys as well for including me in this. I'm, honored to be a moderator and to, have the chance to listen to this. I've listened to you guys tell these stories for so long, but yeah, it is lovely to hear it again. In terms of how we are going to go through this, I'm going to just, if you have any questions or comments or stories you'd like to share, just raise your hand. There's that little button again on the bottom of the screen, and I will click on you and I'll give you the floor. But just a quick heads up before we do that, just wanted to let you know that we are going to be providing some more information after the moderation. So please stick around here after the comments, because we do have some good notes for you guys about what is coming in the email. And also we're going to be doing our raffle. So we will kick it off with, I think, Stefan, if you're there, I think we can turn it over to you. And yeah, you should be able to talk.
So Stefan, for those of you who do not know,
It's got a familiar last name.
is our son and the grandson of John and Clara.
Hi, can you hear me?
Can.
Okay.
Well, we did hear you.
Okay.
Hey, and there we can see you. Good
Great.
to see you, Stefan.
Wonderful just to be here. Thank you. It's I think for all of us who have even imagining our parents, right, as young people is challenging. Imagining our grandparents as young people is especially challenging. And I think one of the great gifts of Called is, for me personally, is being able to envision that world that Grosma and Grospa, as I call them, as all of us grandchildren call them, the world that they lived in, the challenges that they overcame, the tremendous courage, because we kind of grew up hearing these stories. And I think for my cousins in Paraguay, they had a connection that was different. I grew up here in the U.S., so there was always a remove, and so hearing about that courage and that resilience is one thing, but it really comes alive, and so I'm really indebted for you all to just have written this, for that piece of my history to come alive. And I think that because when I think about Grosma, the compassion and the way that her family gave her energy, that's the way I experienced her as her grandson. She really fed off of that energy. And Grospa too had this softness, right? As he aged, that was my experience.
Okay.
Only as he aged.
Right. But that's contrast with the hard exterior in stories I would hear about him, but I didn't experience that. So it's really something to read about that history of them, the way that they could support each other, and the tremendous, you mentioned I would call it like a moral compass that they both had that was so resolute that it was the changing healthcare context was one thing, the doxa of the time, that they were able to take that moral compass and allow themselves to go a different direction, that they were guided by local circumstances and their own sense of what's right. But then also what hasn't been mentioned is the tremendous political challenges, following the post-war environment in communities with very strong links to Germany. And so the fallout of that and the tremendous political challenges, that to me was really fascinating to also read about. So what I take from all of this, just to say one last thing, is just that courage, that resilience. When I think about the legacy that I get to inherit, I'm so proud to have grandparents like this. And I think the adaptability, the flexibility that they showed in the life they led, and then that service, ultimately, that thinking about others and what they can do for others is something that I embrace and I hold dearly. So thank you for writing this book and illuminating these two great lives.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Stefan.
Stefan.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And I think we have another hand raised to Jim Walsh. Jim, if you're there, I'm going to unmute you here, as long as it will let me. There it goes. All right.
Hey,
There it
Jim.
is.
All right, and feel free to share your screen as well, Jim. Share your camera if you have it on.
We can see him. We
Yeah,
can't
we can
hear
see
him.
him.
Yep.
Muted.
There we go.
There's a picture. I live on Zoom and I have there it is. I've had a very different interface through all of this, but I see that's because I wasn't given rights to
Yeah.
Thank you. Boy, what a privilege to be a part of this evening. As a member of Group 3, I don't know anything about Paraguay. I don't know anything about leprosy. I don't know anything about the Mennonite community, but I know Marlena and Ed, and that's a privilege too. Part of my relationship with the two of them is they trusted me to read both books as they were hot off the presses, and then try to write some words that might make it into the book for words of appreciation and the like. And that was That was an easy task. And I guess I have a slightly different perspective on this experience from maybe some of the group 3 people, is that all I know of this is what I've learned from reading the 2 books. And I couldn't help but put the 2 books together, because if you read the first book is Marlena's book, Nothing Bad Between Us. And that's all about her relationship with John. And in that book, or largely, and for her own coming of age story and the like. But you read that book and the backstory is, there is a dogged, determined person of great intellect, great administrative skills, a big heart, not just for the people with leprosy, but also for the country of Paraguay, for providing shelter for Mennonites in a difficult time in history. And then absolutely, the 2 Jesus commandments are, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. The neighbors were the people of Paraguay, and leprosy, and this faith just oozes out of that book. But the book is all about the relationship between John and Marlena, and it was challenging and difficult in the extreme at times. And so I could not help but reflect on the paradox that's so true of life, is that often our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. And hearing tonight about how Clara was the peacemaker and the peace builder, that would serve him well in his dealings with his relationship seemed to be pretty complex with all the powers that be. But that may have served, that kind of division of labor might work well there, but he didn't become a peacemaking parent, it seems like, until later in your relationship. Now, you may not have been a peacemaking daughter until later in your relationship. I'm well aware of that.
You know her, don't you?
But I'm just curious to have your reflections, and maybe anybody else that there's so many people here that know them, about that relationship between the dogged determination that served him so well in one arena, and then that same dogged determination that might have, I don't want to overstate it because I never met the man, but maybe have, crippled him in some way in his ability to be a parent. And I guess I'm interested in your reflections in 2 ways to that. One is what softened him up, and some of that's in the book, but I'm curious now, knowing more about the experience in Paraguay, was there anything about the arc of his experience, growing and developing and then nurturing and then handing off that whole enterprise? Was there anything about that helped him come to appreciate you and maybe others on this call more fully as an independent, at some level, independent human being? And then, this is the harder question, could he have been as successful as he was if he had that soft heart, in all of his dealings? Would that have somehow attenuated his, there's a word I haven't used in a sentence today, attenuated, his passion, his commitment, his determination and grit?
So your question is a really good one, and I am going to hand that off to my sister Mary Lou, who not only knows John Schmidt as well as I do, but she is a therapist and probably has some wise things to say about it. But before Mary Lou speaks, I would love for Gundolf Niebuhr and Edgar Stoess also to be able to say a few words. But Mary Lou, hang on to that. Hang on to Jim Walsh's question. And I would love, if you are willing, for you to speak to that.
Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, and I believe we've got, I hope I made the right person. It is Gundo on the chat. So we will have, yes, there we go. Gundolf, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, so let me just introduce Gundolf Niebuhr quickly for all of you. He is coming to us from the Chaco of Paraguay. And his mother was one of John and Clara's, the first nursing group. So hi, Gundolf, thank you for being here.
Hello there. I guess the picture is not coming out yet, is it? Or
No,
can
we
you?
can hear your voice clearly.
Okay.
You should be
Start
given
my
a
video.
prompt there. There you go.
There you go.
Here we go. Okay. Yes. As Marlena said, my mother was one of the first nursing students with Clara. And my parents, both of them, were among the very first volunteers later on at Kilometer 81. Just a year or two after they had married. And so Dr. Schmidt was a household name practically in my family. I knew them very well. My parents knew them. Whenever they came to the Chaco from Eastern Paraguay, there would be visits. And so when Marlena and Ed were here several years ago, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago, we did a lot of talking. And after that, I never heard anything, and I'd almost forgotten until Marlena one day contacted me on Facebook. So, since then, I've read the book that she sent me as a PDF, and I've been greatly impressed. I work across the street from the hospital where John and Clara started. And I don't know if I can get a screen. If so, I would show a few slides.
Sure. Yeah, you should be able to share in the bottom right-hand corner.
Or what we'd love for you to share the story that you told us about the nurses.
Yeah, I know.
And we're sort of coming to an
And
end
for
of our time.
that, I was going to show a few slides. I was very interested in reading the book also from the political point of view, as Stefan already mentioned. Since John Schmidt did play a considerable role in the controversies taking place in Fernheim during the Second World War. And he was probably more instrumental than he's given credit for in helping to focus more people on Mennonite principles and on the work of MCC at a time when there was so much attention directed toward Germany, and hopes were high of getting back to Germany and possibly to the Ukraine, when Hitler would have won the war over communism. So that was quite interesting for me. And then, yes, of course, John Schmidt was a handsome young man by any standards, and the group of nurses were a group of pretty young ladies. And my mother, even though she really didn't like to speak about these things, but she mentioned it once that whenever John would walk across the hospital yard, one or two of the nurses would turn their heads and sort of look at him just a little longer than what the very, very rigid discretionary rules at that time provided for.
That
So,
was exactly the story we wanted you to share.
Hey, thank you so much.
That is just priceless, because here's this dogged, crazy man, and it's just a different side, a different story. So thank you very much, Gundolf, and thank you for being here tonight.
you're welcome. I'm glad to join you.
All right.
And so you were saying that we were going to reach out to Edgar. I don't see Edgar in the chat room, but he might be on a phone. Edgar, if you're there, can you if that in? But if not, I think we can move on to Mary Lou, who has
great.
Yep.
Let's go to Mary Lou.
Okay.
Hello, I wonder how much time we have left. Could somebody give me?
Just a few minutes.
Okay, so I am John and Clara's 6 out of 8 daughter, and I guess I will respond to this question of would a softer heart have resulted in less of a driving, would have diminished the accomplishment. And I certainly think that's possible, though it seems like one of those speculative questions. I don't really know, right? Like maybe it would have been possible. I certainly know that Dad had some deep regrets at the end of his life at not having been, a few times that popped out where that deeper emotion around pain for like not having been softer toward his children. He felt that. So I would say that. I would love for Luke just to maybe finish us off with sort of Dad's life verse that he has kind of taken on as well. So I'll just pass that on to him.
Yeah, the Micah 6:8, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly, inspired me to get a tattoo with that and a tree because of his, the stories of him planting trees in places where he would go for future generations to harvest the fruits of his labor. So I think that's a wonderful testament. And also to Stefan's point, I remember him laying on the ground on the rug with us playing Tepic, where if you moved, he would get up and tickle you. And so just the playful side of him that we knew as grandchildren was, I think, a different version of his evolution, I guess, in maybe how he responded to those that were close to him.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys being here, and Marlena and Ed, I know you wanted to say a few words to Mary Lou as well as before we turn over.
No, I just wanted to thank Mary Lou and Luke. And I think the tickling on the carpet story is a perfect way to end the stories about John Schmidt, because you've now seen very, very different facets of this complex man.
And that goes on because Marlena loves tickling her grandchildren on the carpet if they move. And they still want to play with her. I don't understand it.
So James, take it over.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Again, everyone, thank you so much for attending. This has been awesome. I'm going to share just a brief screen with you here that gives you our website address for the book. It is called asaga.com. We would ask you, if you have the chance and you have the time and you have ordered the book, to leave us a review on Amazon when you get a chance, or to share a story or a comment or a thought or a review on calledasaga.com. There is a special area for it. Called is the book, Marlena and Ed. Thank you so much for that. And then other than that, Marlena and Ed, thank you so much for hosting and telling your stories. And thank everybody who came and chatted and talked with us. It was great.
All right. We just want to let everyone know that we've so appreciated you being here and sharing this time with us in honoring these people. Thank you for your presence, and
Thank you
All the
so
best
much.
to you.
It's a privilege that we could share time with you. And thank you, James.
Thank you, Jane.
Oh, no, thank you guys. We appreciate it. And so everybody have a great night. Happy Halloween. Enjoy your weekend. And we will be following up with you sometime early next week with all those tidbits. So enjoy your night. Enjoy your weekend. Have fun, everybody.
Bye.